Good evening, you're watching A News. I'm Katie Wilson. Let's see the top stories making the headlines. Russia claims at least 8 civilians have been killed in overnight Ukrainian drone strikes, which followed an attack on a Ukrainian shopping mall that left 16 dead. Israel confirms it's carried out a drone strike inside Syria, saying it's targeted terrorist operatives close to Damascus. And TikTok and its parent company ByteDance pay $400 million to settle a US government case over children's privacy. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Russian authorities claim at least 8 civilians have been killed in overnight Ukrainian drone strikes that have targeted warehouses of the online retailer Ozon. The attacks come after 16 people were killed in a massive Russian drone strike on a Ukrainian shopping mall on Friday.
The attacks reportedly hit several Russian regions, including Samara, where an industrial facility and a retail warehouse came under fire. The site's owner, Ozon, said operations at its logistics centre in Chapayevsk had been suspended until further notice. Zelensky had warned of retaliations after Friday's fatal double drone strike on a shopping mall in the city of Kryvyi Rih that left 16 dead, including children.
Authorities are working to establish information about everyone who may have been inside the shopping mall. An absolute act of Russian brutality, simply beasts. We will certainly respond.
Ukraine also said it struck at an oil refinery in the Novokubishevsk, around 1,000 kilometers from the border. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the attack would deprive Russia's war machine of millions of dollars in export revenues. Meanwhile, Russian strikes on Ukraine continued on Saturday. A further 2 people have been killed and 9 others injured after in a strike on a lorry park in Kyiv, with further attacks in the southern city of Zaporizhzhia.
Meanwhile, a second Ukrainian suspect in the Nord Stream pipeline bombings has been arrested in Croatia as Germany pushes for his extradition. The case is exposing divisions between European allies over the sabotage in November 2022. While Berlin is pursuing criminal charges, Poland's leadership has publicly defended the attackers for challenging Europe's reliance on Russian gas. Here's Anita Sharma.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where a Ukrainian suspect in the Nord Stream pipeline explosions is being held in Croatia as Germany seeks his extradition. Vladimir Zhuravlev was arrested in the Croatian city of Pula under a European arrest warrant and is now ordered into pre-trial detention. German prosecutors allege he was one of the scuba divers who planted explosives on the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea 4 years ago. In an unusual twist, Zhuravlev was reportedly working as a consultant on Snake Island, a Hollywood film about the Nord Stream sabotage starring Sean Penn and Adrian Brody. Now, he's the second Ukrainian suspect detained in the case. Former Ukrainian army officer Sergei Kuznetsov was arrested in Italy last year and extradited to Germany for prosecution. But Germany's pursuit of the suspects has exposed a sharp disagreement with Poland. Zhuravlev was previously arrested there, but Poland rejected Germany's extradition request and released him. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk defends that position, telling the country's public broadcaster this week the people who built the gas pipelines should be ashamed, not those who took them out of service. Poland had long opposed Nord Stream, arguing it increased Europe's dependence on Russian energy while bypassing Poland and Ukraine. Germany, however, continues to pursue the case, saying those responsible must face justice. Now, no one has claimed responsibility, and Ukraine denies involvement. The case ultimately raises the question of whether the sabotage was a crime or a legitimate act of war. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Well, joining us now to discuss the latest on the war in Ukraine is geopolitical analyst Ines Burrell. Thank you for being with us. Now, what more do we know about the damage caused by the drone strike on Kryvyi Rih?
Well, so far we know that at least 16 people have died. We know that there are 9 people missing, and there are over 100 injured people. it's entirely possible that the number of casualties is going to go up. What we also know is that the shopping mall was standing quite a bit apart from other buildings, so it was definitely targeted. We also know that Russians employed double tap strategy. They waited for 30 minutes until the rescuers and medics arrived and then hit it again. So it was an intended target. It wasn't an accident, as many other civilian targets that Russians usually hit.
And officials haven't commented on why Ukraine's air defence units failed to stop that attack on Friday. What more can you tell us about Ukraine's interception rates and why that might have been?
Well, these particular attacks were employing jet engine drones. So these are different from the drones that Ukraine is used to tackling. It's only the beginning of this new era of drones, let's say, and Ukraine has means to combat them, however, possibly not all over country so far because it's a new system. So they can, in theory, intercept these drones, but they couldn't this time. It doesn't apply. It's a completely different system to missile interception. This is only to do with the drones.
In the most effective weapon against ballistic missiles is the US-made Patriot missiles, and Kyiv has repeatedly said they're running low on those. How are international allies responding to that?
Well, there are various international allies, and at this point we're not quite sure whether the US can be classed as an ally to Kiev at all or just an interested bystander. In reality, there are 5 serious anti-ballistic systems in the world that can tackle ballistic missiles. Those are the Patriots, those are Italian and French-made SAM-Ps. Then there is THAAD, which is also the US system, quite well employed. There is Arrow 2 and 3, which is Israeli system, and in theory, S-400, which is a Russian system, but it hasn't really been tested. The problem with ballistic missiles is that you need very specific systems to intercept them, and those systems that have proven to work, which is Patriots basically, they have their missiles, PAC-3 missiles, have been extensively used over the Middle East conflict with Iran, and most of the stocks have now been depleted. At least that is what we are led to believe. We don't really know whether that's true, but that is the official stance, more or less. So there is a severe shortage of missiles, anti-ballistic missiles in the world, and Russians have obviously used this fact and started pounding Ukraine with ballistic missiles, unlike before, when quite a lot of them were cruise missiles.
And what have we been hearing from Ukraine's leadership, from Zelensky, about that? How is Zelensky appealing to the US, to allies?
Well, Zelensky can... the way Zelensky addresses US is you have to be careful what you tell them, but you do really know that you're not going to get anything out of them, because US foreign policy at the moment is not very straightforward and not very clear. Zelensky has several times said that they are talking with partners about possibility of finding Patriot missiles, anti-ballistic missiles. From what I have heard from Zelensky's office, they know where the missiles are all over the world. They can scrape them. It's just that those countries who have them are hanging on to them and not giving them to Ukraine, because they are either expecting a conflict, like for some reason Greece is expecting to be hit by Turkey and they're not giving up their stocks. There are other countries which hold enough missiles for Ukraine to at least survive for some time. But they are not getting these missiles, and they can't really buy them at the moment from US, or at least in the amounts they need, because US doesn't have them, or it has long waiting lists, and they're supplying Saudi Arabia, for example, or other countries. So when it comes to US, Ukraine is not first in the list for Patriot missiles.
That's all really interesting. Thank you very much for breaking this all down for us. It was great to have you on the programme this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, Syria has condemned an Israeli drone strike on a civilian vehicle in southwestern Syria. Israel has confirmed the attack, which has reportedly left one person injured.
The Israel Defense Forces says it targeted a terror operative in the town of Beit Jin in the western Damascus countryside, who it says was in the final stages of preparing attacks. Syria's foreign ministry strongly condemned the strike, saying it violated Syrian sovereignty and international law. The ministry called on the UN Security Council and the international community to take action to halt what it described as repeated Israeli attacks on Syrian territory. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara said last month that Damascus was working with several countries to reach a security agreement with Israel, which he said could pave the way for a comprehensive peace. The operation follows Israel's attack on Syria's Abu al-Duhur airbase on Tuesday. Satellite images taken the following day showed craters on the western part of the runway. Turkiye's defense ministry says Ankara will continue supporting Syria's efforts to develop its military capacity and infrastructure. It also said there was no Turkish military delegation at the airbase before or during the Israeli strikes. Turkey has called for stronger international action against Israel, saying its actions threaten regional peace and stability.
President Trump has said he does not think that Iran is ready to make the right deal to end its conflict with Washington. He's added that his administration is observing what happens next with Tehran, while adding that the US has total control over the Strait of Hormuz.
US President Donald Trump says Iran must be prevented from developing nuclear weapons, but he's also questioning whether Washington wants a new deal with Tehran. Speaking at a Joint Base Andrews, Maryland, Trump also made a striking claim about the Strait of Hormuz, calling it American territory.
We're seeing what happens. They have no money, they have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they are not paying their soldiers, they're not paying their police, they have 350% inflation. So we're just going to sort of see what happens, and we have total control, as you know, of the border. We have total control. If you look at the blockade, we have total control of that entire region having to do with the Strait of Hormuz. And that means well into it, the land areas. So they would love to make a deal, but they're not ready to make the right deal, in my opinion, yeah.
The latest tensions follow a US-Iran agreement that set a 60-day deadline for talks to end the wider regional conflict. That deadline has passed, but no final deal has been reached. Washington is now preparing to announce new economic sanctions on Monday. The measures could affect Iran and some of its key trading partners, including China. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has rejected the threat. He said the planned US economic operation is destined to fail, pointing to previous rounds of sanctions and Washington's maximum pressure campaign. Iran is also sending a tougher message over the Strait of Hormuz. Navy Commander Shahram Irani said Iranian forces would soon deliver what he called a historic and unforgettable lesson at sea. He also said areas east of the Strait of Hormuz and in the Gulf of Oman are under complete Iranian control. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington is closely watching how the conflict develops.
The US has imposed a 50% tariff on roughly $20 billion worth of Canadian products after last-minute trade negotiations broke down. Canada says it will respond with tariffs of its own on a dollar-for-dollar basis.
Ongoing trade talks between the United States and Canada were suspended late on Friday after failing to reach terms. A senior Trump administration official said the so-called Section 338 tariffs on about $20 billion worth of Canadian goods would go into effect just after midnight on Saturday. The breakdown in talks follows 3 days of intense negotiations between Washington and Ottawa. The new tariffs target some of Canada's most popular exports to the US, including hockey equipment, dairy products, and alcoholic beverages. Meanwhile, electronics, industrial machinery, and dairy products have also been added to a pre-existing tariffs list on steel, lumber, and automobiles. Overall, the new penalties will affect around 5% of all Canadian exports south of the border. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney described the latest US demands as unacceptable and said his country would respond with tariffs of its own, dollar for dollar. Carney has received the backing of Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who said Canada needs to stand together, more united than ever before. The United States, meanwhile, says Canada was unwilling to accept the terms discussed during the negotiations. Business leaders in the US and Canada have raised concerns over rising costs for industry and consumers. The two countries have one of the world's largest trading relationships, with billions of dollars in goods moving across the border every day.
TikTok and its parent company ByteDance have agreed to pay $400 million to settle a US government's case over children's privacy. The Justice Department accused the platform of illegally collecting personal information from users under the age of 13 and failing to get parental or guardian's consent. The settlement ends the lawsuit, which was filed in 2024. The deal comes as ByteDance also works on a new ownership structure aimed at keeping TikTok available in the United States, where the app has more than 200 million users. Police in Sweden are investigating a sword attack at a secondary school that has left one person dead. The 18-year-old suspect is reported to be a former student.
Police were called to the scene in the town of Fagersta in central Sweden just after 2 o'clock local time on Friday, after receiving reports that a violent incident was underway. The school, which had just reopened after the summer break, has around 450 teenage students. Swedish public broadcaster SVT has reported that the suspect was himself a former pupil who was seen carrying a sword and wearing a helmet. He was fired on by officers before being overpowered.
The first patrol on the scene entered and reported at 14:16 that a perpetrator had been neutralized by police fire. That individual was subsequently arrested and is now in custody.
The authorities say 2 boys, aged 12 and 17, were severely injured in the attack. A third person has since been released from hospital. Youngsters were kept inside the school building before being allowed to leave.
Well, we've been locked in for 5 hours. At first, it was just a completely normal day, you know. But then I saw a guy who had blood all over his body, or on his back at least. And then I saw the police and everyone else arriving. The teachers told us we had to stay put, though we didn't know for how long.
A state of high alert was declared in the surrounding region after the assault. Sweden's King Carl Gustaf said he received the news with dismay and sadness. The incident is the latest in a series of high-profile attacks at Swedish schools. Last February, 10 people were killed in a shooting at a facility in the town of Örebro. In March 2022, an 18-year-old student stabbed 2 teachers to death at a secondary school in the city of Malmö. Police say while investigations in Fagersta are continuing, they believe the suspect was acting alone.
Latvian border guards have detained 28 migrants who crossed into the country from Belarus through an underground tunnel. The smuggling route was found about 20 metres from the border in Latvia's southeastern region of Kraslava. The authorities say the entrance was concealed under moss. It's the second such tunnel discovered in Latvia in recent weeks. Latvia has recorded nearly 10,000 illegal crossing attempts in the first 8 months of the year, compared with about 1,200 for the whole of 2025. European leaders have described the rising migration pressure along the EU's eastern Baltic flank as a hybrid operation linked to the government of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. The UK Interior Ministry says France is stepping up efforts to stop migrant boats crossing the Channel, with overall numbers falling. It comes as footage is released showing police intercepting a dinghy before it could be launched from the French coast. French authorities say officers prevented 185 small boat launches between April 27th and August the 2nd, stopping more than 4,000 people from reaching the UK. Officers also seized boats, engines and fuel and arrested individuals suspected of people smuggling. 12 so-called migrant taxi boats have been stopped along the French coast since March, including 3 in the last 2 weeks. Earlier this month, 230 migrants crossed the channel in a single large dinghy. The figures come 3 months into the new UK-France deal to reduce small boat departures. Central Asia is facing growing pressure on its land and water resources as climate change intensifies existing environmental challenges. A new United Nations assessment warns that the impact could become increasingly serious for the region's ecosystems and economies. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamirzana has more.
More than 80 million hectares of land across Central Asia are affected by degradation. That's according to a new United Nations report on the state of land in the region. The report covers all 5 Central Asian countries and highlights a range of environmental challenges, from soil erosion and salinization to drought, desertification and dust storms. Climate change and growing water scarcity are making these problems even more severe. And the consequences are not only environmental. Land degradation is estimated to cost Central Asia between $2 and almost $6 billion every year. Tajikistan is particularly vulnerable. More than 93% of the country is mountainous, making it highly exposed to water erosion, landslides and mud flows. There is also growing concern over the future of its glaciers. Tajikistan could lose up to 80% of them by the end of the century. And dust storm from the Aral Sea region can also travel as far as the Pamir Mountains and settle on the glaciers. But there are also signs of progress. Tajikistan leads the region in documented sustainable land management practices, including terracing, restoring vegetation and improving pastures. The report says countries across Central Asia need to focus on 3 key areas: preventing more land degradation, reducing the damage already being done, and restoring degraded areas. It also calls for better satellite monitoring, greater sharing of successful practices, and closer regional cooperation on drought, water resources, and the protection of glaciers. Fariza Kalamirzana, Almaty, A News.
Tashkent is hosting the 4th Uzbekistan-Azerbaijan Regions Forum on Saturday. The two countries say bilateral trade has grown 26-fold over the past decade, while the portfolio of joint investment and trade projects has now exceeded $10 billion. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova reports from the forum.
Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan are looking to turn rapidly growing economic ties into concrete projects at the regional level. Around 420 companies from both countries have gathered here in Tashkent for the 4th Uzbekistan-Azerbaijan Regions Forum. The growing partnership is also translated into commercial projects. Azerbaijan's SOCAR is preparing to enter Uzbekistan's retail fuel market, adding another major Azerbaijani company to the country's expanding investment landscape.
Relations between Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan have developed comprehensively. Today, thanks to the efforts of our respected heads of state, these relations have reached an unprecedented level. They are constructive in nature and continue to develop. Various forms of communication and dialogue between the Baku and Tashkent.
Economic ties between Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan have expanded rapidly. Bilateral trade has grown 26-fold over the past decade, reaching $795 million in 2025. There are now almost 260 companies in the Azerbaijani capital operating in Uzbekistan. while more than 130 Uzbek-invested companies operate in Azerbaijan.
As entrepreneurs, we are contributing to the rapid development of the economic relations between Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan. One of our projects is the development of one of the largest textile clusters in Azerbaijan. We also have a number of projects in Uzbekistan together with our Azerbaijani partners. Our goal is to further improve the efficiency of our economic cooperation.
The two sides are also expected to develop joint action plans for 2026-2027, with the focus now shifting from agreements to implementation. The broader aim is to connect Uzbekistan's production and investment potential with Azerbaijan's business, transport and logistics networks, and further strengthen economic ties between the two countries. Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan News.
And finally, 2 fishermen have been rescued off the Mexican coast after floating for 5 days inside a giant cool box. The men were found more than 240 kilometers off the coast of Chiapas after other members of their fishing cooperative raised the alarm. They had last been in contact on Friday and had survived with no food or water. The Mexican Navy launched a search operation and located them around 130 nautical miles offshore inside the container. It's not clear how they came to be there. The fishermen have been brought to safety and have been medically assessed. That's your news for this hour. From all of us here in the studio, thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. See you soon.